Welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast with Mike Brennan. Well, welcome, friends, to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. You can connect with me over on my website, which is mikebrennan.me, and I would love to hear from you. Matter of fact, I have designed resources for you as a creative person, because I say this all the time, and I truly mean it. When you create, we all win. I want to see you winning creatively. I want to see you showing up and doing the work, the hard work, and the work that is breakthrough work, and the work that is not just for you, but for the people around you. And in order to do that, we need to be engaged in our creative lives, in our creative selves. And so I've created resources like the Daily Creative Habit 90-Day Journal that helps you track and measure what it is that you say you want to be doing, setting intention, yes, but also taking action steps, because I believe that's where things actually start to change and transform. And I also have other resources like the Daily Creative Habit membership. It's a paid membership. This is kind of the inner circle. If you're looking for a group of people to meet with regularly, we have a Zoom call once a month, and we have a Facebook group where I post all sorts of prompts that help you set intention, take action. There is also a free Facebook group that you can join if you're looking to kind of dip your toe in the water and starting to share maybe some of the things that you're creating in a safe environment. I would love to have you be a part of that as well. And really, I am just here to cheerlead you on, to be an advocate for your creativity as I show up and engage with mine. I know what it's like to have the lonely journey of being a creative person, the struggles with the imposter syndrome, the struggles with inspiration, motivation, and building a habit that will actually help you and not hinder you, to help you show up and do the work. And so I would love for you to head over to dailycreativehabit.com and check out some of the resources there for you. Now, on today's episode, I get to have this conversation that's pretty amazing. It's with a friend of mine, Jessie-Sierra Ross, and I met Jessie-Sierra on a panel platform that actually was hosted by another person who was on this podcast previously, Deb Eckerling, and she talked about the Deb method and setting goals, and that's an amazing episode. Encourage you to go back and listen to that. But Deb connected us, and I just knew that Jessie-Sierra was someone who I wanted to have on the show to explore her journey and her story more so. We talk about her being a professional ballerina. Yes, you heard that right. And also someone who is a writer and she's been on-air personality with teaching people recipes and food blogging. And I mean, the list goes on in terms of her creativity and how she has in each season embraced what it looks like for her. And so she loves to teach people. She loves to take what she has learned and give it to other people in a way that's accessible. And she has a book that's out. I encourage you to go check that out, especially if you're into recipes. And just even from how she's described it, just sounds like a beautiful project. And it's called Seasons Around the Table. You can find that at your local booksellers or any of the Amazon, Target, et cetera, et cetera. And if it's not at a local bookstore, you can always request it, because that always helps authors as well. So anyway, all this stuff we talk about, not just the particulars of what she has done, what she is doing, but also how did she get there? What was some of the process behind it? And just her outlook and her approach is really something I truly appreciate. She is thoughtful. She is warm. She is intentional. And we have just an honest conversation today, which I think you will greatly be inspired by. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with Jessie-Sierra Ross. Well, Jessie-Sierra, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And, we connected probably about, a couple of months ago. And we were on a podcast together with someone else who has been on this podcast, Deborah. And I love the conversation we had there. And so much so I was like, we definitely need to continue this conversation and even dive deeper into all the creative things that you're doing, that you have done. And I just love your outlook and approach to all these things. And so I'm excited to dive into these today. So thank you again.
Me too. And, Deb Eckerling, she connects the best. And I'm
Yes.
always happy to meet another creative because it's that thread that binds us together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So for people who don't know who you are, they're listening in, they're like, okay, I'm excited for this too. You are someone who has multiple creative threads, if you will, that has happened in your lifetime and probably still happening. And I love when I get to talk to people who have those multi-passionate interests and pursuits and talking about how they came about and what that looks like to pursue that in such a way that it doesn't feel like you're disregarding a part of yourself, but that's really more alignment, I guess. So before we get into all the things of like writing and dance and food blogging and just all the things that you're doing and have done, I want to know, like, when you were a kid, what is the first memory that you have that was associated with creativity, like a creative act or project maybe, or something? Like, what did that look like for you?
That's a great question. I would say I was about 3 years old, and I came from a family that was wildly creative, full of artists, both visually, performance. My father was a master carpenter. He had a forestry degree. My mother was a former teacher, both hippies. So I grew up in a very free flow, free environment. And one of the best parts of my growing up was I lived on some really wild and open land in the city of Boston. And I remember being about 3 years old, being in the garden that my mother had carved out of the rock and making pictures out of flowers. I remember plucking little buttercups and making little smiley faces and then patterns. And for me, art kind of just flew out of me from the moment I heard music to, learning how to move to music, to be the music was something that was really innate, to seeing color and pattern and really the sort of gift that nature provides us, especially when you're little, you're more pliable in that way. You see it a little bit more without the sort of societal distinctions of what is creative, what is pretty, what is art. This was just art for art. And so I remember doing a lot of flower picking, a lot of patterns with pretty rocks and things, but very young, about 3.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that you put it that way. There were none of these outside constraints placed on you. You're basically doing it because you're having fun, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
enjoying it and there's no judgment there. It's just
Mm-hmm.
simply a free flowing. And I find that so many times when we think about those experiences, we can trace them to usually having some kind of influence to what we're doing now, even if it's not a direct, like you're picking flowers and making art out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something about maybe the process or something about the feeling that you were in that kept you going, this is what I want to pursue. And it may show up different ways in different seasons, but that is really the motivation, I think, underneath why you do what you do, right? I mean, do you find that true?
Absolutely. And I think from a personal experience as a child and even into young adulthood, I had terrible social anxiety. I had a stutter, a speech impediment. I didn't actually speak until I was 6 years old. I just blathered and, it was pretty concerning to everyone around, but there was nothing wrong with me. I just took my time. But in that frame, I was able to observe a lot more than the average kid, and art and dance became my voice. It was the only way that I could communicate outside my family in a very direct, emotional way. And so it became a language. It wasn't just something I did, it was my language. It was the way that I could understand the world because without being verbal, it's very difficult to understand what's going on around you. Everything is in the present. Right? Because you can't understand what's going on in the future. You kind of have an inkling of what happened in the past. So in one sense, it's finding control through creativity, but in another, it's creating this sense that you're always in the moment. And I still remember that. I still remember that impression. And that lasted with me is that when you're creating something, whether it's a dish, a plate of amazing food, a dinner party, a choreographed dance on stage, flowers, a bouquet for your neighbor, it's in that moment and it only lives in that moment and it will never happen again in that way.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. It's funny, depending upon your experiences, you can have a different approach to that. Like for me, I think about creativity in terms of future because there's always a new project going. There's always something I'm dreaming of. What's next? What's next? And I have to practice being in the now over the
Mm-hmm.
next. And it can be difficult because when I don't do that, I miss out on opportunity to celebrate. and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge like, here's where we've been and here's where we are now. There's been growth, there's been progression. And there's also something beautiful right now in these moments that we have, that if we don't stop and celebrate them, we'll miss out. We'll miss out on the opportunity to be in them, to be fully present, because it's always future. It's always next, next, next. And so I love that you expressed it that way, because that is certainly a different lens to look through, and encourages someone like me who's, again, future oriented like that to, yes, now, right now, like even right now, we're on this podcast, we're having this conversation. This is all there is right now. And don't miss these moments.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that I am not a perfectionist type A personality who's always planning my next move and stressing out about it. But I was gathering my thoughts today to write an article later on today. And a phrase came to mind that practice creates instinct. So the more you practice something, it becomes instinctual. You don't have to think about it too hard. And I was thinking back to my days in the ballet studio where, I mean, that is repetition in the highest form. You're repeating the same exercises over and over and over a lifetime. And the same in the kitchen. You're replicating recipes, which are a dance in themselves. But then eventually it becomes so innate and so rote, it becomes instinct. And I think that's, as artists, we all get to that point. It might take different time, lengths of time to get there. And then it's so much easier to enjoy the present. I'm still working on that. I still, but that phrase just came to mind, that practice creates instinct. So you can be comfortable with those feelings and those risk-taking sort of endeavors.
Yeah. I love that. Love that. And you brought up dance. And so, of course, I want to go there because, first off, it's not every day I get to speak with someone who's a professional ballerina. So dance is something that I have had kind of an odd relationship with, in terms of, with myself. I've always felt like awkward, and just like, if I'm doing what I would call like spaz dancing, where I'm, out on a dance floor and I'm cutting it up comedically, I'm okay if people are laughing or whatever, because I'm like, yeah, I feel weird, I feel awkward. Like, I'll just lean more into that. But if it was like to be serious or whatever, I'm like, I just feel very disconnected from myself in that way. And so even there was at one point I went to a certain school that had a large dance program. And I remember being friends with some people and seeing the discipline, like you said, and seeing just the work that goes into that. And I was like, wow, like I'm so impressed with that and the demands. Can you talk a little bit about like what made you decide this is something that you wanted to pursue? Like, how did you know that you were on track for yourself, going, yes, I'm being true to the things I really want to pursue that feel aligned?
I think for many dancers, and please don't knock yourself when you're out on that dance floor. I gotta go back to that. Movement is everything. If you have to, take a little, for me, I have to have a cocktail, but if you need to go out with a group of friends, if you have to go out and be silly and shake it off and dance is the most freeing experience. And ballet dancers in particular have a difficult time just dancing. So you're not alone, but it's movement and you have to enjoy it. But going back to the inspiration for dancing, for me, I came from a really long line of dancers or people who were in movement. My grandmother was a gymnast back in the former Soviet Union. My mother was a trained ballet dancer for some time. My grandparents were championship jitterbuggers. If that's a word, doing the jitterbug. Movement was a thing. My grandparents and my father, they did the old Ukrainian folk dances. They were hired out for weddings. It was the joy of physicality that was something that was just innate. For me, though, I felt from a very young age, I could feel the highs and the lows of the music, as they say. I could feel the emotion of music, and it was something that reverbed in me. It's something that was so soul feeding, soul nurturing, and there was no way I couldn't do it. And I started dance when I was about 6 years old, just as a way to get out of the house and not drive my mother crazy. I'm the eldest of three. I was a crazy kid. As my eldest son is very much like me. We called him the vertical explorer. I was a vertical explorer. I was climbing trees. I was falling out of trees. I was knocking things over. I was a nut. So my mom put me in dance, and I was an extraordinary mimic. And I remember auditioning, and they were pulling my legs up by my head, and they were making me curtsy and do all these things. And I was falling down with all the other kids, but suddenly they did a move and I mimicked it perfectly. And that was the first time that someone acknowledged, you have a little bit of skill here. And it just kept growing. And I loved the history of it. I loved the the way that you can be present but not be concerned with the outside world. Going to the bar, even at a very young age, let's say 9, 10 years old, I found a lot of comfort in the repetition. I found a lot of comfort in being able to control sort of intricate movements. And it was something that was creating sculpture and music and movement at the same time. And so around 10 years old, I knew that I wanted to do this. And my parents tried to dissuade me, and because it's a tough life. But I went full throttle and met amazing people. I became a professional dancing with full-blown adults when I was 14 years old. I became an apprentice in a company. I became a full company member, a soloist at age 16. I traveled all around the country and worked with artists from around the world. I studied with amazing teachers. It's like a family tree, dance, because it's almost, how storytelling, old-fashioned storytelling, it's verbal, right? Nothing's written down. For dance, it's very much that way. It's your teachers, and you can go all the way back to the very basis of ballet. And Henry the 16th? Not Henry. Oh God, Louis. There we go, Louis the 14th. It's been a while, but it was organic. It was that moment that I knew that I could give something that was special from me to the audience. And that's what really attracted me to dance. But yeah, that's what carried me through the discipline. The discipline is very, very intense. And it's not only the artistic part of it, but also the sort of dance society that runs around it. The sort of, it's changing now, which is good. But the pressures that come with being a young dancer, being a young woman in a very male-dominated field that was not really supervised. And so you became tough. You had to become street smart. And that was in addition to trying to work your butt off.
Yeah.
To get a spot. So yeah, a dance, I loved it. I miss it. I miss the freedom. I miss flying. I was a jumper. I flew with the men. I just loved leaping and feeling that moment of weightlessness.
So how many years were you actually involved with professional dance?
I would say actively, especially 12 to 15 years. I took a little break. You have to remember, it starts young. So I started very young at 14. I took a slight break when I was 21 after dancing professionally with Festival Ballet Providence. I went to school. I went to college because I was feeling burnt out. Dance at that time, they didn't encourage dancers to necessarily think. You were a tool for the choreographer. You were something to be adored on stage, something to admire, but you were not necessarily thought of for your mind or your spirit. And so for me, I needed a break. I went to school, graduated from college, returned to professional dance again, and was teaching and choreographing, and ended up only retiring at age, let me think now, 29 when I had my first child. But up until I was 6 months pregnant, I was still teaching and dancing and choreographing with that big old belly.
Wow. So when you were coming to face this, okay, it's time to transition out of this. Obviously, there are practicalities like you just mentioned, I'm sure. But were there other things where you felt like the season was closing and a new one was opening? And what did that look like for you?
I look back, it's funny you use the word seasons. I look back at that season of my life, and the first time that I left dance to sort of nourish myself, it was both a decision I made, but it was mainly a decision that I made because I was forced. It was an impetus. I had to respond. And this is how I responded. The second time that I decided to leave, similar idea, but under much more joyful circumstances because I was having a child. But I always knew that dance was going to be a fleeting career. And I started thinking about it in that way very early on. And I had always assumed that I would go into choreography and teaching, which I did. But when it came to transitioning into my second, or I guess it would have been my third career by that point, I was a mom of two, and I suddenly found myself in a completely new area of the country. I had baby babble in both my ears, and I was going cuckoo banana pants. I had never not worked. I had never not created, and I was being creative with my two munchkins, but it's on a different level. And I realized that I needed to do something. And I had always had a fondness for cooking, and I realized that, okay, I'm going to follow this passion because I followed the passion in dance. I followed the passion to teaching and choreography. I'll do this. But I think for me, it was, I can't stop moving. I can't stop creating. I get very, very low. I get very depressed. I feel like I don't have a spot in this world if I am not doing something. So I think it's really important that for creatives, when we get to that transition point, because sometimes the work isn't serving us. Maybe we're not serving the work anymore. Maybe it's due to unforeseen challenges, personal life, work life. But sometimes you're forced to make it. And what's important is to realize that you're not necessarily closing the door. You're still taking all those skills that you learned before, but you're transitioning it into something new. And you feel it. You feel it in your heart of hearts to take that risk. And you may not have a parachute yet, but you know that you have to take that first step. And what's neat about it is that your previous skill set, they're a pretty good parachute. They will open. You will find a way to use your background to push forward and learn something new, and that will serve you in your new pursuit. So for me, it was just allowing myself to understand that professional dance to teaching choreography to motherhood to cooking, it wasn't chapters that ended. It was a conversation that continued.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It's much more free flowing, and there's an evolution, I think, that happens there, right? If we're paying attention and we're listening to ourselves and realizing these things are not deaths of skill sets or passions, but yet they get transformed into other things. And also, like you said, to reiterate that, the skill sets that we learn, and even something like you wouldn't necessarily think of that's a skill set, because we think oftentimes it's like tactical things, but being resilient, learning how to adapt, those are skill sets that will serve us all through our life, because we'll always be encountering new opportunities and new seasons we need to step into and problems we need to solve. And the way that we look back and go, how did this happen for me back in this situation? What did I learn from that? And what does it tell me about myself and how I can move forward? Those are things I think that we keep close to us and that keep showing up and helping us and be the guides that we need in the moments where we need them, right? So for you, when you're then stepping into cooking, obviously there are a lot of people who enjoy cooking, but what was it for that you thought, okay, this can be now another career. This can be something that can really take off?
It was an interesting journey, and dancers are not known for, they may love food, but we're not allowed to eat a lot of food.
Right.
So there was a large part of my life where I could appreciate the art, the visual, the sensory, but I couldn't indulge in it. And when I retired, that was not necessary anymore. I found myself when I was cooking that there was still this repetition and this beautiful way of taking something from nothing. In dance, you're starting from scratch with a piece of choreography and they're making it on you, and then you're performing it. So something, nothing to something. And the same with cooking, it's ingredients are in their most basic form, and then you've created a recipe, and then you have an end visual result. So the cooking part, it's really struck me as something that turned from a hobby to a profession was when I was able to break down recipes in a way that allowed people who had no experience in the kitchen to understand what we were doing. The biggest hurdle I ever had with cooking, and this was from personal experience, I had the tools to cook. I could do regular cooking, and I got involved in reading blogs and cookbooks and watching shows, and there was this sort of innate idea that people had the tools already in their toolkit. They already had the base knowledge, and so of course they could replicate this. There wasn't a description of what it should look like, what it should taste like, what tools, the viscosity of a sauce, that's how you know it was ready. And I found myself just so irritated because what was on the page was not on my plate. It was not working. And so for me, it became a lesson in breaking down concepts, very much like you do in dance. If you're going to do a frappe, you're going to strike the ground, point the foot, forward momentum. This is how you do it. If we are going to make a beautiful French omelet, you're going to whisk the eggs in and with a bunch of butter. It's going to look like this. It's going to, it will sound like this when it's frying, and you're going to flip it like this. And so there was a lot of similarities in the technical side. And when I started my blog, Straight to the Hips Baby, it was both to tell stories, but to teach. That's something that's been in me forever, is just to instruct. I can't help it. I want to show people how to do something that I love. And when I got the feedback that people were cooking recipes right through the blog, there's over 100 recipes on that blog. People would take it as a mission, and they were learning to cook from my words, from my lessons, and not just, a pasta bake. We're talking macarons. We're talking about things that are specialty, and they felt more confidence. They felt equipped. And even if they fell on their face, like I often do with it, because when you're learning, it happens. They knew because they saw me that you brush yourself off and you get back up. It's like in dance, you may be doing 32 fouettes and you fall on your keister in a tutu. Mortifying, let me tell you. I've done it. But you get up and you keep going and the audience applauds. That's the same idea. There's always, I want to be that person that applauds you. I'm like, oh yeah, so your macarons didn't rise. There's no feet on them. It's okay. I still applaud you for trying. And from the blog, it started turning into brand collaborations with Ghirardelli and Saint Germain, and seeing some of my work appear on larger platforms like Pottery Barn and Williams Sonoma, and started doing TV work and showing people on screen how to cook, which is a different audience, but also a different talent set, because you're really boiling down the most important parts of a recipe into 3 minutes and showing it how to do it and making banter and having fun. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the talents, the skill sets, the experiences I had had, from the repetition of the ballet bar to the performance aspect of being on stage to being able, I call it the tap dance, being able to respond to events that you had no planning with, like being dropped out of a lift. You're like, ta-da, suddenly I'm on the floor. What am I going to do now? That really helped me in my career. It helped me in the kitchen when I lit a kitchen towel on fire on screen, or, suddenly my sauce didn't come together. It's okay. You keep tap dancing. And when I just, the feedback, it told me that this was something that the world needed. And my voice was something the world wanted to hear. And even if I'm sort of a small time creator in a very large, lush niche, it's still valuable. And so I work to connect with those people, but also it helps push me to keep learning, because I am a forever learner. My dance teachers used to call me the sponge, because it wasn't just dance I wanted to learn about. I wanted to learn about choreography. I wanted to learn about stagecraft. I wanted to learn about costume design. And I find my way doing that same thing now in food. I want to talk to chefs and see what they're doing. I want to talk to those mixologists to learn cocktail craft. I want to see what the photographers are doing over here with the newest and greatest cameras, because it all wraps up. Because every time you learn something new, you can bring it to your work. And more than that, if you understand it, you can then teach others. So that's kind of my spiel with that. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
No, I love that. There's so much good stuff in there. And especially you pressed on something that I want to explore more, in this idea of teaching. So when you're teaching somebody something, you need to reverse engineer. You need to have an understanding of something, not just for yourself to execute it, but going, okay, how is somebody else going to follow this process or this path, or understand what it really takes to create this thing? Is that something that happens for you where it's easy for you to break things down, or does your intuition of how you do things kind of make it a little bit more difficult? Because, like, for instance, when somebody asks me about some of the colors I use and my choices, I'm like, it's an intuitive thing. So much of that, because I've spent the time doing those things and having to think through those things earlier on. Like you said before, the repetition of that kicks in after a while, where you're making decisions on a level at which it's not as conscious or as painful sometimes. And so therefore, when people ask me about that now, it's harder for me to go, well, I can't really walk you through why I did what I did completely, because it's just more of a, this is what was right for me. This is what, and I could talk about color theory. I could talk about more of the cerebral things around that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm like, there's something inside of me that's guiding me that is harder for me to break down into a process for somebody else. So for you, when you teach, is it more like, hey, this is natural for me to break this down and it's easy, or does intuition kind of get in the way sometimes and make it harder for you?
It's a little bit of both. It's interesting you talked about color theory, because back in the days when I was teaching bloggers and photographers how to photograph food, color theory was one of my favorite topics. And I think this is a great way to show an example. For me, it goes back to that idea of practice. Practice creates room for instinct. It's sort of like the infinity symbol. It feeds each other. It's a loop. And where it crosses is where someone who's practiced can identify the technique to what makes that instinct work, right? So I knew instinctively what flavors would work together. I knew what color palette would work I didn't know the official name, analogous and complementary and, talking about color wheels and, triastic, all that kind of stuff. It was something that was, okay, this is a skill set I already had. I had it innately. Now, when I do my reading, I say, oh, that's why it makes sense. That is very interesting because we, like opposite color theory, when we love red and green together because it's the opposite subtract and we associate it with an emotional response. We think of the holidays, da, 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 da. This is why it makes sense. So once you understand why your instinct clicks with the technique and the theory behind it, then you're able to teach it to those who are not necessarily as instinctual with their feelings, or maybe they're not as confident. I truly believe that art, as well as cooking and movement, this is all in there. It's just that we second guess it, or they're talents that really need some water and dirt and sunshine to grow. We just have to trust in it. Going back to, the first question you asked me about being a child and creating, when you're a kid, you have no doubt. Before the world gets you, you have no doubt. Everything you do is brilliant in your mind because it satisfies you. And it's the audience of you. And then we start to try to satisfy our parents and we satisfy our community, our teachers, da, da, da. I think that goes back to teaching is allowing the student to find what satisfies their creative eye, but also to make mistakes and understand that the mistake, it's not going to ding you for the rest of your life. It's, this is what it is. You do not want to mix dairy and vinegar together because you get a type of cheese. Let's try that again. Or, oh, your sauce broke. That is okay. So for me, it's just understanding what may come naturally to me and then understanding the technique behind it so I can break it down. I lost the thread of the original question. But I think that there's a quote, something like, I'm paraphrasing, but something like bad teachers teach good teachers. I think that people who have had to try to understand what they're doing and why it works are much more adept than those that it just comes to them because they've never had to break it down. It happens in dance all the time. You have these amazing stars who are just crazy once in a lifetime talents, but they don't have the understanding because they've never had to work to figure out that step or that piece of choreography. So it's much harder. It's oftentimes the dancers who have struggled that make the best teachers. So it's just taking the time to understand the theory and the technique behind it. And I'll stop there.
No. That was great. And I think you're right in that when you have to struggle your way through something, you own it more. And you also understand what the pain points are along the way so you can address them better for people who are learning because you've been there.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily come easy and quick. And so you've had to wrestle your way through. And so you're using that, your own experiences as the backdrop and going, if I've experienced this, certainly other people are going to experience this as they're engaging with this. So I think, yeah, you're right. That does make, I think, great teachers, ones who are, imperfect, ones who maybe aren't naturally the talented and gifted right from the get-go, but who have worked to attain what they have, what they understand, what their experiences are today. So returning to your story, you're writing your blog, you're having these on-camera experiences. Does the book come after that then, or where in the story does that happen? And
No,
tell us
absolutely.
a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I have been running my blog for at that point, about 3 years as my full-time job and making television appearances with several different stations every month. And I was approached by a publisher who had an idea for a book. And writing a cookbook had been a dream of mine from the very get-go. And it was something that I was mulling. I had a couple of concepts in mind. The publisher I met, they wanted to create a trilogy. They had an idea. They pitched it to me. And I said, well, how about this idea? That was it was a jumping off point from what they had. It fit. And I wanted to create something. They wanted something with flowers and gardens and seasonals. And I said, hey, well, I have this idea where we create seasonal menus and tablescapes and full parties and making it really light and bright and colorful, tons of flowers, fresh ingredients. What do you think about this? And they loved it. And so my sort of book journey was very untraditional. Typically, you would create a pitch, you would create a proposal, get an agent, they would then shop it around. And this one sort of fell in my lap in a way, but I still had to hustle for it because I wanted the book that I wanted.
Yeah.
Because again, if you don't love the thing you're working on, it's so much harder to create. And I knew like, yeah, I liked their idea, but I liked this one better.
Yeah.
And if you're going to devote, upwards to a year to 2 years of your life to something, you better love it. So that's how Seasons Around the Table was born. I kind of pitched it on the fly. I just knew about it. We created in a day, which is unheard of. And with my husband who did the photography and I did all the styling, setup, cooking, recipe writing, storytelling, we created something that is very unique to the market. There hasn't been something like this before. And it's a book that really is my heart. It touches upon my background in theater and dance, the artistic eye, but also my love of nature, my love of flowers, going back to that story of being a child playing with flowers. I come from a long line of green thumbs. My grandmother, bless her, I never got to meet her, but I got to meet her garden. And as a small child, I knew her through her flower garden and her orchard and her love of nature. And it really transferred into this book. So there's over 100 recipes. There's over 100 full color photographs that I created with my own hands. We are a boutique company of 2 creators and worked with the tremendous team at Schiffer Publishing who helped with the layout and the editing, and they are phenomenal. And we created something that I am so incredibly proud of, and that can it's a cross-genre book. It can, if you love flowers, you'd love this book. If you have gardening, if you love art, because many of the scenes are actually inspired by Renaissance art and the old masters. If you love food, of course, you're going to love this book. If you want to see something that tells a tale of someone who grew up first-generation American in a city on the last open space in Boston as a hippy-dippy kid turned ballerina, you'll love this book. So that's how it came about. It's definitely my 4th child.
I love that. Yes, yes. There's such beauty and intentionality as you discuss your work and your approach. And I so appreciate that there's a lightness. Now, I'm sure, everybody who creates anything, there is struggle. There are moments where you're like in the middle of it going, I'm in the messy middle and I don't know if this is going to turn out the way that I hope. And all I can do is just keep going at this point. But as you talk about things, there is such a lightness, there is such a joy in your work, how you describe it, how you approach it, your outlook. Have there been the moments where you've been like, okay, this is going sideways, or this was a surprise and we're needing to now course correct? Like, what did that look like for you?
Definitely. I mean, I definitely go into my moody moments. I go into my very self-critical moments. As a former performer, self-criticism is always riding on your shoulder. Usually when you're in the dance studio, it's critiquing how you look or how you've moved. In the kitchen and in writing, and frankly, I'm a media personality now. So in media, it's just as strong, and I can be my own worst critic. I think that what's important is those gremlins that live on your shoulder. And I have a set myself, the ones that criticize and the ones that tell me I can't do it or I'm not worthy. You got to shut them up. I'll be blunt.
Yeah.
Like, you just have to acknowledge them and say, you know what? This is my fear talking right now, because if I fail, then I fail. What is the worst thing that's going to happen? Maybe I'll transition to a new creative outlet. Maybe I'll just move on to the next project. Maybe I'll just learn from this and do it again and do it better. And it's hard. It's a constant sort of reassurance. And there are moments in the book when I was writing the book that it was overwhelming, because this book, we pretty much wrote it and developed it between 6 and 9 months. A cookbook typically takes 2 years. So we were plowing ahead. It was intense. And there were moments I wanted to give up. And I will say, even post book, even now when when you create a really big piece, you've been working on a project for a really long time, there's that high and then there's a crash out, right? Because it's finished. I had that after productions where, you work for 3 months on something amazing. And then suddenly you're like, what do I do now? I was in one of those funks in the fall of last year. I was like, where do I go now? Allow yourself to feel it, because if you don't feel it, you're not going to be in a position and on a platform where you can start the next endeavor. So I let myself feel it. I hibernated for about a month. I thoroughly enjoyed having my coffee in bed in the mornings after the kids were in school, and reading and filling my creative cup. I started reading different novels, and I started reading art books, and I started taking myself out on art dates because I realized that I needed stimulation. I needed something to sort of coalesce around this idea that I have for my next endeavor because I wanted it to be strong and I wanted it to be true. Don't rush that process. And every creative, everybody has those moments where it's completely filled with self doubt. And you might be in a pit. I've been there, but you have to rely on yourself to get you out of there, but also your creative community. So for me, that's my husband. He's my greatest cheerleader. He knows me. He knows I'm a moody artist. I'm Slavic. I can't help it. But also my greater community, my community of food photographers, of creatives, of dancers, of media friends, not just colleagues, who will say to you, like, hey, Jess, you can do this. Stop it. Look at this. Look at this. And they set reminders for you, but they also, you need that community to help inspire you too, because they also have been in that funk. So yes, it's really about digging deep inside yourself, but also those roots that you have within your community.
Yeah. Yeah. And to know that we're designed that way, to be in community and context with each other. We all take turns. There are times when we need to show up for those around us and be that word of encouragement and support, and vice versa. And I think that having that outlook, it certainly helps in those moments where you may not, you feel like, I don't want to be a burden, or I don't, I just kind of want to hide or whatever, and we kind of all have those. And that's, I think, a part of it too. I love that you expressed that self-awareness of going, I need to have a season right now where I'm pouring in, where I'm taking care of myself, where I'm stimulating myself, because so much has been upon this one project and then it ends. And that sense of now what, right? Yes. Along those lines of now what, is there anything, we've talked a lot about the sitting in the now and of course the things that you've done, but is there anything as you look forward that you're like, here's some ground I would love to take? Maybe it's outside of any of the expressions that you've even talked about. Maybe it's a certain project that would really push you to another level or experience. Anything that you're willing to share with us right now?
Absolutely. So I like to set intentions. Often they're, 1 year goals, 2 year goals, 5 year goals. Anyway, they're just intentions because if I don't have that bullseye that I'm aiming for, I tend to settle down. And that's not a great thing for someone who wants to keep building. So my intentions for this year, I really am working towards starting a food and lifestyle TV series. And it's something that I've played around with over the last couple of years. I've pitched a few things. I've had some people approach me with other projects, but I haven't quite found the right fit. And I would like to actualize that this year, that I can create this program where I come into people's homes and really give them what the in-person sort of effect of the book, that we create these amazing food-based experiences, that we bring the floral, we bring the natural elements of the world into your home, but also in a way that's very accessible, approachable, and uniquely you, because I can give you the toolbox, but in the end, that person is going to create it. So I am looking forward to touching base with more media agents and with producers. So if there's anybody out there listening, I am open.
Yes.
I can be as elegant and creative as you want, but I am very genuine. I'm very warm. My ethos is, fancy, not fussy, because I think that you can bring beauty into your world in so many different ways. So that's one of my goals for this year. Another one that I am working on is growing my audience and making sure that they know who I am and that I know who they are. So I've had a great little project on the side on Substack, which we can talk about a little bit later. And just really getting into visual media more and more. I think that I will be transitioning into that because it's my happy place. It's where I get to perform, and the feedback is tremendous. It's almost addictive in that way, that loop of teaching and seeing people really, really enjoy what you're giving them. It's that nurturer in me.
Yeah.
When you come to my house, I am most likely going to hand you a cocktail and have you take a seat and feed you or give you a job in the kitchen. But you're going to feel warm. You're going to feel welcomed, and you're going to feel really well fed.
I'll be right over. That's awesome. I love it. Love it. Yeah. And there's something about the connection with people that you realize the work that you're doing is having impact, that nothing can replace that. I know in times in my life where I've been a part of things creatively where I haven't had that, it felt disconnected because I realized that my motivation in creating is so that I can have those connections, so that there is this impact in conversation and this sense of shared experience around what's been created, and that's important. And so now, knowing that empowers me to go, whatever I create needs to have that component to it, so that there is that connection. Because otherwise, it's just, I might as well do something in the closet and never share it, and just, it is what it is. Which sometimes you do have those projects too, but by and large, knowing your motivation, knowing your why, understanding how you're wired, those are very important parts of being a creator as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's different types of creators. I think there are those, and there's many famous examples of them too. There are those who create art for themselves. There are those who create art for their cohort, for their peers. And then there are those who need that sharing. And it might be more of a, you're nurturing yourself, like you're feeding off the energy. And there's other artists where it's that give and take. I feel like you and I fall in that. I love to give and I love to get the feedback. It's a mutual sort of symbiotic relationship. But you're right. It's acknowledging what works for you and where your passion falls and catering to it. Because again, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you're not going to do it very well.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, I've loved this conversation. I feel like we could talk for days, honestly.
Absolutely.
But as we're kind of bringing things to a close, where can people find your book? How can they follow along with you? Like, lay some places where people can connect with you.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I am an open book and I love connecting with food lovers, with creatives, with really anyone who enjoys just that performance of art. So you can find my website. It's called straight2thehipsbaby.com. And that's sort of my living portfolio right now. I also have a really stunning newsletter on Substack. I'll say that again. There's that speech impediment.
Yeah.
And it's called Jessie-Sierra, The Last Bite. And it's a fun place to write and create. And it's a more, very unpolished in a way look at my life. Like, I give you my perspective. The writing is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not out there unpolished with my writing, but you'll see what I feel about current events, about the food scene. You'll get a great recipe or two, photos, family stories, personal reflections, which are more well shared on that platform than many others. So I hope you'll connect there. And again, it's Jessie-Sierra, The Last Bite. And you can also find me on social media at Straight to the Hips Baby, where I share really pretty photos, things that intrigue, things that can teach. I go into a lot of how I do things for both the at-home foodie, but also those of us who are in the profession of food creation. Because again, I love to teach. So we talk about color theory, we talk about plating techniques, we talk about camera angles and equipment. It's a passion of mine. It's how I give back to my community. And on all platforms, it's at Straight to the Hips Baby.
Awesome. And the book is available, I'm sure, on Amazon and other large platforms like that, as well as maybe some independent places. And if not, they can suggest it, right?
Yes. So Seasons Around the Table is available on Amazon.com, Target, Barnes & Noble, all, those fine book selling platforms. And it is just filled to the brim with colorful photos, amazing recipes, and really, really fun table scape ideas.
Awesome. Love it, love it, love it. And I want to thank you so much for our time today. It's been just truly just a blessing to have this conversation, to hear your insights. You're so thoughtful, articulate, and even in your own words, warm. I love the adjectives you've used in just talking about your journey and about your creativity and just knowing yourself in this process too. Thank you for that. I know that listeners are, I'm sure, taking notes and thinking, I resonate with these parts of your story and your process. And now it's encouraging them to create as well, which is what honestly all this is all about. Is, I say it often, I say, when you create, we all win, because you're winning because you're showing up as you're created to be, that creator. And then other people get to be the recipients of what you create. And so we all win when everybody just kind of gets to work, does the thing that is inside them to get out. And thank you for doing that all these years. Thank you for continuing to do this and to dream. And I wish you all the best. And I hope that shortly I'll be able to say, yeah, we had that conversation on the podcast about her show. Yep. It happened here. Somebody heard her, and yes. So all the best to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for building this amazing community.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.